So as you guys know, I recently traveled to Iran. I visited the capital in Tehran for the Subh International Media Festival. It was their third annual festival, and it's basically a conference of journalists and activists and academics and politicians. And it brought people together from all around the world to discuss the situation in Gaza and the geopolitical situation broadly. I was privileged enough to be in attendance with many other brilliant journalists and academics, one of whom was the man sitting next to me, who needs no introduction, Max Blumenthal, the founder of the Gray Zone. And I don't really need to give him much more of an introduction. You all know who he is. So I wanted to sit down and talk to you today, Max, about our experience in Iran. Both you and I collected a lot of footage while we were there, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to share with people our experience so they can gain a deeper understanding of Iran. Now, I was in the capital only. I left after a week, but you spent some time afterwards and you traveled to other parts of the country, and so you saw a lot more than I did. So I wanted to take this opportunity to discuss our experiences and then share the footage when I edit this podcast for our audience to benefit from. And this is obviously happening at a critical time. I wasn't expecting things to heat up in the region as quickly as it did. But now I think it's more important than ever for people to understand who the people of Iran are, what their goals and interests are, especially in terms of their relationship with the United States and Americans in general. So yeah, that's essentially the purpose of the discussion I wanted to have with you today. So I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me. Yeah, so I guess, tell me about your intention for wanting to go on this trip to Iran and what that was like.
We were going to a country on the precipice of war. We knew it. I didn't believe the deal was going to work out. Because I understand the political forces at play in this country. I don't know why anyone thought there was going to be a deal. And I understand what Israel's intentions are and where it was historically, fighting for its very existence as a sort of an ethno-supremacist state. So I knew we were walking into a potential war zone, but the window during which we were going was sort of the beginning of negotiations. And Trump had set this very tight time frame of like 62 days. Mm-hmm. Friday the 13th of this month was the 62nd day, and that's when Israel attacked after telling Trump, well, you said it, and Netanyahu basically overpowered him. So I figured, we would go at a time that would be technically safe to be there. Maybe not politically safe, but physically safe for us. And we would be able to see this regional superpower and diverse society for ourselves. And what my Iranian friends told me was, it's very chaotic there. You're not going to have some minder telling you where to go, and it's not going to be some Potemkin village tour. They turned out to be right. And a close Iranian friend encouraged me to bring my family. So, and many people said it would be great to bring your wife because then you'd have closer interactions with Iranian women and would get to see how they really live, contrary to the propaganda. I also brought my daughter, and it was like one of our greatest trips as a family to go there, just because of the nature of the society, the culture, the hospitality of the people. And I was hoping we would get access to either military officials or military sites, as well as we wound up getting to go to this civilian nuclear reactor I was told was a must visit. And towards the end, I was able to actually speak to diplomats who were involved in the negotiations at the highest level. Mm-hmm. And so that's what the whole point of the trip for me was. It was a journalistic opportunity, but it was also kind of like a family vacation because, our family might be a little different than other families in the way we perceive the world and what we value. And I should say, like previously, Anya and I had visited Gaza together, and we visited Syria. Gaza before the genocide, Syria before it was practically dissolved as a state. So we kind of have bad luck in a lot of these places.
You know, I actually was joking with my friends before I went. I told them I want to see Iran before they destroy it. And now they're in the process of trying to destroy it. I'm glad I got to see it. We also took a tour on different days of the Aerospace Museum, and we got to see Iran's military capabilities. Can you talk to me about, what you witnessed there and how that's coming to play now? I mean, these are the tools basically being used to defend Iran from Israel right now.
Well, I should say, I wish we were still there. Just us. Obviously, I wouldn't want my family to be there to cover the war. That's our job, and to bear witness, and to use our skills as writers, videographers with our native English language to be able to communicate what's actually taking place there. And so many of the places we visited are now under attack. The Tajrish neighborhood that we visited so many times, home of this famous market, so many great restaurants and cultural attractions. I spent a night there with a more secular family, and I drank some wine at their house, like many Iranians drink wine privately in their homes, and that's the kind of population that lives there. They are now under attack, harshly under attack. There was a huge bombing there today. It may have been a terrorist car bombing, and I would really want to follow up and see how people are reacting to this. But some of the friends that we made there one of them is in central Tehran, lives a few blocks from the leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Apparently, there's news now that Trump vetoed an assassination of him. But that neighborhood has been under intense bombing for the past few days. And I've been hearing from her that she's trying to put into words what war is for her young son and explain what war is. And the bombings, the way she describes it, with drones coming in and then her building shaking, it reminds me of what it was like when I was in Gaza. Israel's going to try to Gazify Tehran. And at the same time, Israel's experiencing something that I don't think it's ever experienced in its history, and certainly hasn't experienced the kind of existential dread of being under bombing in your cities that you cannot stop since 1973, when its army nearly collapsed and it had to have an emergency airlift thanks to Henry Kissinger. The Iranian ballistic missiles that we saw on display at that Aerospace Museum are so significant in turning the tables on Israel, and will be, if Iran manages to establish deterrence, they will be the key. And they were conceived by one of the heroes of the 8 Years' War with Iraq, in Moghadam, who was killed in 2011 testing a new missile. Many of the missiles that he designed have been on display in the last few days. I mean, we're talking about older missiles like the Ahmad missile. And then, you walk towards the end of that ballistic missile display and you see the Fatah hypersonic missile, which can actually release warheads, change directions after it locks onto its target. It goes up to Mach 15, reaches Tel Aviv in like 5 minutes. This, I don't even know if it's been deployed yet, but we saw Iran strike the Weizmann Institute, which is the key nexus of Israeli scientific and nuclear training, as well as for drone research, AI research, the most advanced research, which is then deployed by Unit 8200 and Israel's military, other aspects of Israeli military intelligence, were based there. And in fact, the FBI's counter-espionage division investigated the Weizmann Institute for stealing nuclear secrets from the United States. But they, of course, dropped the investigation under political pressure. So Iran is hitting some pretty significant targets, and we got to see why and how. And there are other components of the Iranian military outside the IRGC, which we haven't yet seen on display. I mean, the Iranian Navy, for example, infantry, special forces. But we saw the drones, we saw the ballistic missiles, and we saw that Iran has developed its own space program through the Noor satellites, which have provided it the possibility to obtain some intelligence inside Israel and improve its targeting.
We also saw air defense systems, radars, massive radars, and these systems there's debate over how well the space above Tehran and Iran, Western Tehran, because Israel claimed that they control the airspace. They have air superiority, is what they described it as, from Western Iran all the way to the capital. And there's debate over whether or not this is true, but we do know that the F-35 has never been shot down before. But apparently, according to Iran, they've shot down up to 3, which is historic. Just shooting down 1 would be historic. So they claim they shot down 3, and they announced today, I saw, as reported by Aria, who's a pretty good X account, not officially connected to the Iranian government, but does a pretty good job of amplifying official statements from them. And they announced that they actually have an Israeli pilot captured. And so if that's the case, they definitely shot down an Israeli fighter jet, whether that's an F-16 or an F-35, regardless, that's still impressive. And I knew their capabilities, but going to that aerospace museum and seeing what's on display and being told by the IRGC Public Relations General that what you're seeing here is at least a decade old. We have things that you haven't seen before. And that was incredibly impressive to me. I mean, what I saw in that museum is what we see Turkey doing with their drones and their systems. It's what we see the West building. And so it was very impressive. And it's remarkable, when they give the presentation. I don't know if you got to experience the presentation because the general...
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
He wasn't there for me.
Well, during the they sit you down in an auditorium and they put on this presentation and they just talked about the commitment and dedication for what they've been able to do. And they had pictures of the different generals and like the person you mentioned who died testing a new missile. But there was, on this wall, they had all these portraits of all these different generals and engineers and scientists that dedicated themselves to this aerospace museum. And most of them, I think, have been martyred at this point. But there's just a dedication by the people of Iran, not only to the revolution and the government, but to defending Iran itself. And they take you through this exhibit, the War of the Cities, right, between Iran and Iraq. And they talk about how many people died defending Iran from this invasion by Saddam Hussein, which was backed by like 82 countries around the world. And I think a lot of people just are kind of ignorant of this history and the experience and the suffering of the Iranian people. That just stood out to me, and I think it was remarkable and inspiring to see. These tools, these systems that we saw are currently at play, and it's tough to know which direction this is going to go, but I want to ask you, you mentioned that Israel's experiencing something that it probably has never experienced before, at least since 1973, the inability to prevent missiles, dangerous, powerful missiles, 1.5 ton warheads hitting their cities. And now actually we're seeing residential buildings get knocked down as if it's Gaza, and civilians are dying, and politicians are in hiding. Bezalel Smotrich and Ben-Gvir haven't been seen since this announcement. Ben-Gvir
came out to Bat Yam after Netanyahu showed up there.
Yeah. Okay.
They both reared their heads briefly to cast their eyes on the fodder of Zion, the people that they have kind of sacrificed for their crazy war, and then they basically had to show their faces. Ben-Gvir did it as an obvious kind of photo op to show that he's like with the people.
Right, and he's not scared and hiding.
Bat Yam is a very Likud area, by the way. It's heavily Russian. It's like lower middle class, lower class Jews there. And they got hit really hard last night. So it makes sense that they would show up in a place like that rather than like North Tel Aviv.
So given that these kinds of areas are now being hit and they've never experienced this before, what do you think was the calculus by Benjamin Netanyahu? There's discussions and debates over whether they're completely in control of the situation. As we were discussing last night, tweets by people like Zay Squirrel basically suggesting that the war is going to escalate from here. It's a done deal. Israel and the United States have been deluding Iran and tricking them, and this is all just a maskarivska, and they're going to, this is exactly what they wanted. But it seems like potentially it could not be. So what is your read on the situation? Netanyahu must have known this was going to be the result, and so what do you think they were expecting?
What Netanyahu is expecting is Netanyahu knows he's been able to manipulate Trump every step of the way. He sees Trump correctly as a stupid oaf who consistently rolls over after initiating some process of deal making. And that Trump actually has no political agenda, and there's nothing beyond what we actually see. I wish everyone else would see Trump like Netanyahu does. What we see with Trump is him going to Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and just accepting as like bounty, just any amount of gifts that he can take in for his family. He'll take that, and there's nothing beyond it. That's all he wants. He sees that as the goal. And the Israel lobby has done a lot to incentivize him and entice him as well. But they also have something that the Gulf Arabs don't have, which is political leverage to actually harm Trump domestically. And after 2 assassination attempts, I think Trump might actually be afraid that they would ice him if he actually suspended weapons or did something serious to end this. I think Trump personally would not like to see this war take place. The people around him, J.D. Vance, people and his director of national intelligence, they're not interested in getting the U.S. involved. But every time Netanyahu pressures Trump, he rolls over, as he did when Netanyahu told Trump, the 2-month deadline's up, it's time for us to attack, and Trump just green-lit it and then went to a performance of Les Miserables with J.D. Vance, who was just like tweeting cringe-worthy jokes about how he thought it was actually about the demon barber of Fleet Street. And they knew the war was coming. Pete Hegseth went to a baseball game, and they knew this consequential war is coming. I don't think they understood or understand Netanyahu. Netanyahu understands them. He doesn't understand them. Netanyahu sees them as stupid Gentile cattle. And they see Netanyahu as a rogue actor, but they also see him as kind of wise and canny. And Netanyahu assumed that by launching this attack with a decapitation strike at the beginning, first of all, it's very depressing that Netanyahu could get away with something that daring against the IRGC's leadership, that they didn't take measures when it was so clear that war was coming at some point soon. But by getting away with it, Netanyahu set the stage for devastating retaliation that everyone knew was coming, would come from Iran. They had the capacity. Israeli intelligence has done its assessment. The US has done their assessment. And you can read these publicly or from think tankers like the director of the Institute for National Security Studies in Israel. I think his name is like Tamir Heyman, who published in Israel's Channel 12 what exactly would happen. And the wild card is Trump. He basically predicted an open-ended war with heavy ballistic missile strikes, and that Israel could do deep damage to Iran's leadership, but it could only set back its nuclear facilities 6 months to 12 months, and it could not carry out a kind of regime change war and finish it on its own. So Netanyahu's calculus is that the stupid goyim in Washington are going to ultimately get involved. And that's been Netanyahu's objective all along. If anyone's followed Netanyahu, they would know that when Obama was president, the first time he came to Washington, when John Boehner invited him, who was the majority leader, an opponent of Obama, something we'd never seen before, a foreign leader being invited by the opponent of the president to speak in Congress and use that as an occasion to attack and manipulate the president. We've never seen that before. This was like 2011. Netanyahu holds up a satellite or an aerial photograph of Auschwitz and says FDR refused to bomb railways to Auschwitz. Then he holds up a satellite photograph of, I think it was Fordo or Bushehr or Natanz, one of those nuclear reactors, and he's like, this is the new Auschwitz that will destroy the Jewish people. You must do something about it. So basically, if Obama fails to bomb those nuclear facilities, he's the ultimate anti-Semite. appeaser of Nazism. And Obama, he didn't do it. They got the JCPOA done, which was a complete failure. But this is Netanyahu, and this is his objective with this war. And so he's raising the stakes so much. And what is he doing to raise the stakes? He's putting Jews out there. He's basically, from the Netanyahu point of view, he's putting Jews out there like sheep to the slaughter. He's using human shields in order to show them to the West, in order to get the West to bomb. It's exactly what they accuse Hamas of doing. Will Trump bomb? I mean, maybe by the time this is online, it will have already happened. I'm seeing rumors that he'll do it on Monday. Trump has released a statement saying...
that they're considering it, right?
Yeah, no, he released a statement, one of these goofy Truth Social statements that proves everything I say about Trump just being a complete doofus. He complains about not wanting to get credit, or about not getting enough credit for making peace, and that he's a peacemaker and he's a deal maker. And things were heating up between Serbia and Bosnia when I came in. I cooled that down. And then Pakistan and India, I shut that down. You know, he wants a Nobel Prize. Because the Nobel Prize comes with like $1 million. It's more money for his family with that level of prestige. That's what he wants. But he also doesn't understand Netanyahu or what it would actually take to shut this war down. Now, I could shut it down if I were president, or you could. We would know how to do that. But, you know.
How would you do it?
Well, you just suspend spare parts for like one. You just stop one shipment on the air bridge to the Nevatim Air Base, and the whole thing ends.
Yeah, but that would get you potentially iced by the Israel lobby, or by whatever forces are at play that serve Israel. So what would you do to mitigate that and then take this action? Lock them up?
Well, of course, I would have campaigned for president and probably been assassinated then, so I would have never made it in.
Right.
Because during my campaign, I would have said that AIPAC, this would be at the top of my agenda, AIPAC would have to be registered as a foreign agent, and there would be an Espionage Act investigation. And the Justice Department made one of its greatest errors in 1964 by failing to register them. That would shut down the whole program. The Zionist movement would come after me. And one of the most important pieces of journalism I ever produced was one of my first pieces from inside Israel called Feeling the Hate in Jerusalem. And if you haven't watched it, it's because you're a Zoomer or maybe a millennial, and you weren't there when, like, I was making history before viral videos really even existed. This video was one of the first videos banned by YouTube, Vimeo. I was publishing stuff at the Huffington Post then with like a direct arrangement with Ariana Huffington and her team. They said, this is not journalism. You cannot have this on our site. I was denounced by the completely talentless fraud Ta-Nehisi Coates for that video. Jeffrey Goldberg joined in. Jeffrey Goldberg joined in ultimately in denouncing me. 50 Cent published the video on his website for some reason.
Yeah.
And the reason was what was in the video hit hard for especially Black Americans at the beginning of the Obama era. Because what I did was I went into central Jerusalem where there's the bars in these alleys. And it's yeshiva students from America who are the biggest douchebags from Long Island, or I should call them douchebags. And they go there for a year and they do tons of drugs and get high and wasted every night. They're not doing anything spiritual. And I went up to a table of guys with a camera and just said, what do you all think of Obama's speech in Cairo, which had happened like 2 nights before? And they were all from the 5 towns of Long Island, these like heavily Jewish suburban towns outside New York. And they just were like, he should be assassinated. They started calling him the N-word over and over again. Like, Americans aren't used to hearing young people say the N-word, but that word is commonplace in the 5 towns. And it showed Jewish Zionist entitlement and racism and the attitude of the Zionist movement towards Obama, because they actually believed he would create a Palestinian state. They actually believed Obama's fake presentation to the Arab world. They didn't understand who Obama really was. And that video was so shocking. And but like Ta-Nehisi Coates, he was sucking up to Obama, and he wanted Obama to seem as though he was beloved by Jews. Like he was like, I'm Baruch, I'm not Barack, I'm Baruch. And the whole Obama camp was frightened by that video. It couldn't see the light of day, and so it was completely buried. But it really shows that was the last time an American president actually made any overture to Arabs and actually did something slightly out of line with the choreographed blueprint that's been presented to them by the Israel lobby. And I think there was actually, I think, an article in a local Jewish paper in Atlanta about quoting people on their wish for Obama to be assassinated at that time.
That video needs to be reposted to X.
I've done it, and it's on X, but things have gotten so
crazy.
You look at Israelis now, it's like they're in the homes of people in Gaza wearing lingerie. Like there's a guy in the corner with blindfolds on that they're like putting cigarettes out on. It's like, that was crazy at the time.
Yeah. Bringing it back to the conversation about Iran. So now the war is heating up. You mentioned people that we know, that we made friends with, that are in Iran right now experiencing this. What do you think potentially happens next?
I don't know what happens next. I know what happened before, and I know how it's affecting people there. I mean, that's one of the things I learned. And I am like an amateur student of history. That's what fascinates me the most, more than like studying military gear or international relations or geopolitical economy. And the history of the Iran-Iraq War was something that I hadn't explored in depth, and so I wanted to learn more about it, how it impacted the generation that went through it. So in Iran, we went on the Tehran metro all the way from the north to the last stop in the south, well, as far as we could get, and then went to the Behesht-e-Zahra Martyrs Cemetery, where the graves of so many martyrs, including very important commanders in what Iranians call the War of Holy Defense, are buried, including the brother of Mohammad Bagheri, the IRGC commander who was killed on last Friday. And our host there was Mohammad Marandi, who just completely destroyed a Sky News reporter, as he's famous for doing. I mean, he really shows what resistance looks like in the media realm, and he's a professor of international politics, and he's very expert on American studies as well at University of Tehran, but he's also a veteran of the Iran-Iraq War, as so many people of his generation were. And he took us to the graves of all his friends who died when they were teenagers in some of the most consequential battles. And we also learned about it just through the names of the ballistic missiles that were on display at the Aerospace Museum, like Khorramshahr. That is the most significant battle of the war. So you have a revolution in Iran. There's hostage taking of Americans, which sets the stage for the West and the Gulf states to weaponize Saddam and the Ba'athist regime in Iraq as kind of a battering ram against this revolution, which threatens their regional hegemony. And Saddam is very well equipped, but and Iran is caught off guard, and he occupies the city of Khorramshahr in 1980. It was liberated in 1982, and that was like Iran's Bunker Hill or Gettysburg. It's like one of the most important battles, and it took so many lives and so much. The locals actually managed to hold Saddam's powerful army off for 11 weeks with very little weaponry. So there's so much history there that's now become ingrained as part of that generation that lived through the war. Then you had the War of the Cities, which resembles what we're seeing now in Tehran, where the civilian population was used initially by Saddam and his air force and his Scuds to put pressure on the Islamic Republic's leadership. And then they began retaliating with developing their own ballistic missiles, firing them into Baghdad. Obviously, what Iran is going through now is much more intense because Israel has so much technological superiority, and its death tech is the premier in the world. But that period folded into this long, extended push by the Iranian leadership to attempt to take Basra, which would have established a beachhead inside Iran at the heart of its Shia population center, which likely would have toppled Saddam's government. That was their view.
Basra in Iraq, you mean?
Basra in Iraq.
Yeah.
And so that led to the Karbala 4 and Karbala 5 operations, which Mohammad Marandi participated in, and he was a frogman. And the reason that he was a frogman and his unit were frogmen wearing scuba suits was because the Iraqi army had set up these elaborate defenses that forced them to go under marshes, under barbed wire, and then endure tank shelling in order to reach their goal. Now they pushed the Iraqi army back. They did penetrate the defenses, but they failed to get to Basra. They may have, it seems pretty likely that they forced an end to the war, but so many Iranian men, young men, died in those battles, those final battles. And that left such a scar on that generation, but it also prepared them for future wars. You can see all of the leaders that were the IRGC leaders who were killed on Friday and who have subsequently been killed were veterans of those battles, directed those battles. They see everything through that prism. And then the people who we met, who are like our colleagues in Tehran, we would meet like young journalists who were, very international minded, cosmopolitan, fascinated with our perspective because they want to know more about, what's happening in the U.S. But many of them are dedicated to the Islamic Republic, some for one simple reason, which is that unlike many other young people in the Muslim world, they actually get to be proud of their country's foreign policy. Unlike young Egyptians, for example, they don't hang their heads in shame and feel just this complete sense of humiliation because they get to be part of a society whose government is actually fighting back against this singular evil of our time. But they have deep grievances with the government. For the first time, they are experiencing what their parents did. And they may have wondered, why did people say that America's the great Satan and Israel's the little Satan? Like, what is this? It just sounded kind of like a slogan to them.
Yeah, there was a generational divide.
And now they're going through their own Khorramshahr, and they're starting to see why their parents would chant those slogans or why their parents have this stoic attitude towards war or understand the scars of the generation of Mohammad Marandi.
And understanding why it's worth stomaching sanctions and living through them and, not experiencing the Western consumerist bullshit that they could have in order to invest in their own minds and capabilities to defend themselves and to have that pride in that foreign policy. That's only possible because they have struggled and they have sacrificed. And I was thinking the same thing, that potentially because when I was there, I felt that generational divide, the cultural divide. We went to the market, we saw people dressed as goths. I discovered that anime is incredibly popular in Iran. A lot of the youth are, dressing a lot more liberally, despite the fact that it's banned. You're not supposed to use Instagram or any of these other applications. They all use VPNs. The government cannot control it. They've given up completely. And so Western culture has just permeated through the society, and there's this divide. And so I was worried that, maybe they could stoke a rebellion or color revolution and topple the government. But I feel like maybe now these people that did have grievances against the government are seeing, Irani babies pulled from the rubble, and Israel attacked a hospital, just yesterday or this morning. And so now they're seeing and understanding and why they need to go through this in order to defend themselves. And so I'm hoping that potential for color revolution is suppressed, because we know that's part of Trump's war plan. It's what Israel's been trying to do. The Shah's son, this fat privileged pig, in a foreign country, is like celebrating Israel's attack on his people. Like, even if you have a grievance against the government, how could you support a foreign power, undermining the livelihoods and the power of your homeland, your supposed homeland? It's disgusting. But he's part of this effort to kind of sanitize what Israel's doing, and he claims we're going to bring democracy, even though he's the son of a king, and he fully intends to reinstate a monarchy if he were to be put back in power. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think now that this younger generation is finally getting a taste and being reminded what their parents went through, and hopefully that can empower them to continue to resist. So you traveled outside of Tehran. You went to these historical cities. You went to Isfahan in the central area of Iran. And so you got to see what life was like outside of the capital, which is a lot more liberal and cosmopolitan. Can you talk to me about the experience you had, not only seeing these cities and the way that what Irani infrastructure is like outside of the capital and all over the country, but also your experience meeting people who knew you were Jewish, they knew you were American, and just talk to me about what those conversations were like, and what those people want and hope for, and in terms of a relationship with the American people.
Well, Isfahan is one of the, for tourism alone, I'd rank it in like one of the top 3 cities I've ever visited just as a tourist.
Why?
The central area of the city is completely walkable. There are long stretches of walkable areas that are like long plazas lined with shops that stretch for blocks and blocks. It's a city famous for bicycles. The bicycle is like one of the symbols of Isfahan, and everyone bicycles around through central Isfahan with no car traffic. And in the center of these plazas are vast gardens with ponds. Then there's the famous square of Isfahan, which is surrounded with bazaars and other shops, like craft shops, is something I've never seen before, with a palace at the center of it and mosques at each end, representing Iran's thousands, like 3,000 years of continuous civilization. You can really see it there in Isfahan. You can see the elegance of Iranian civilization and its diversity, because you not only have these amazing Shia mosques, but you also have the Armenian quarter, where the Christian population is worshiping openly in a 17th century cathedral-like church, and you can interact with them in the streets. And the Jewish population is also worshiping and practicing its faith openly. You can't just walk into a synagogue. You have to call the director of the synagogue and ask if you can come in on Sunday. And so I did that with Iranian journalists, and I participated in Sunday prayers with them and then spoke to them afterwards. And I also spoke to a leader of the Jewish community in Tehran. And then walking around the streets in Isfahan or everywhere in Tehran we went, people would ask where I'm from. Probably not with you, because you
look
pass.
like them.
You're Iranian passing,
yeah,
Persian passing. I don't pass. So I would say I'm American, and people would just be so overjoyed to have Americans there. There was no hatred of Americans anywhere I went. I mean, when I went to the former U.S. Embassy, the Den of Spies, the Museum of Espionage now, the docent, who was like a young man overseeing the museum for that day, he gifted me a plaque of Qasem Soleimani when I told him I was from the U.S. He was not hostile to me as an American. And it was the same when I went to the aerospace park, which was run by the IRGC. What I'm saying is across the board, there was no hostility to me as an individual American, as a member of the American people. And I would tell people openly that I was Jewish, and there was no hostility there either, because Judaism is not roundly demonized in Iran. As a minority faith there, it's protected under the Constitution of the Islamic Republic. That was the first time they received formal protection. They're guaranteed one seat in parliament, along with other minority faiths. They can't get more than one seat, and there is a suspicion about that community for sure. And I heard the suspicion. And the leaders of the Jewish community in Iran do everything possible to draw a very sharp distinction between Judaism and Zionism. One community leader said to me, "We are the sons of Jacob, not the sons of Israel." Israel is basically just the Hebrew word for Jacob. And that's sort of their job. Whenever Israel does something horrible in Iran, they denounce it so that the Jewish community is not implicated and then destroyed, as they were in so many other Arab states, like Egypt, for example, where Israel did everything possible to implicate the Egyptian Jewish community as spies, hiring them as spies to carry out bombings in Egyptian population centers and then framing it as an attack by communists and the Muslim Brotherhood in order to try to get the British to reoccupy the Suez Canal. This was called the Levant Affair. It was the death of Egyptian Judaism. The Zionist underground in Israel, organized by Yigal Allon, planted bombs in Jewish community centers in Baghdad during the 1940s to compel Jews to leave Iraq. So Iran's community exists in this precarious space, but it's Zionism that is responsible for their precarity. And the Iranian leadership would like to preserve them there on the basis of them not being political Zionists, basically being non or anti-Zionist. So in some ways I kind of pitied them because of the situation they were in. But it was also a different form of Judaism, totally different mentality than you would experience in the US, where they were truly committed to the original practice of the faith and cultural tendencies that have always existed in that part of the world. I actually got to go outside Isfahan 40 minutes to a shrine to Serat Bat Asher, who is the granddaughter of Jacob, who is said to have waited there with Jacob for Joseph to come out of exile. And next to it, to the shrine, is a 9th century Jewish cemetery. So it's been active since the 9th century. And I observed Jews who currently live in Isfahan saying prayers for their relatives who are buried there. So that's just something you cannot experience in the US. And that's why so many American Jews turn to Zionism, because they have nothing else to hold them together. They have no way of being a minority in a majority Gentile society. There's no pillar for them to revolve around. Their faith is basically hollowed out. And so they turn to this fake, I would say, anti-Jewish construction that was conceived by a messianic atheist who initially offered to convert Europe's Jews to Catholicism in a meeting with the Pope, Theodor Herzl, the godfather of political Zionism, a betrayer of Judaism. That's all many American Jews have, who aren't Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox, is Israel. And that's why so many of them just, no matter how dark the genocide becomes in Gaza, they just can't part ways with their Zionism because they have nothing else to turn to. And then they'll just suddenly drift into nothingness in this giant, vast, empty, capitalist, Gentile society. So, you really see in Iran how they hold on to their faith. And that, to me, was inspiring.
While we're on the topic, before we return to this conversation about Iran, I want to ask you about the role that you think Jews should play in challenging Zionism? Because this has been a discussion online.
What's you mean it's a role for anti-Zionist Jews?
Anti-Zionist Jews, yes. So there's this discussion. We saw, this exchange of tweets between Dan Cohen and others, but I think this doctor named Afif, and there's a conversation taking place about what the role of anti-Zionist Jews should be. And I think it's important because right now there's a lot of mixing. People are merging Zionism and Judaism together. And I think that's like what Dan Cohen is worried about. But then you have others that correctly point out that there is an issue of Jewish supremacy. So what is your interpretation of this conversation, and what are your thoughts, and how do you think people should be perceiving it and navigating this conversation?
I'm not going to, I didn't read all those tweets or that Twitter exchange. So I'm not responding to it now. This is something I've always talked about ever since I kind of came out as an anti-Zionist Jew. And since October 7th, I have felt that people are more inclined, who are paying close attention to the Gaza genocide and feel this human revulsion with what is happening there, are more inclined to conflate Judaism with Zionism in an almost direct way, and maybe read a few Talmudic verses that are just utterly insane, and believe that that's how Jews are educated. That we, at a young age, we're told that this is what the Talmud says, and this is what we have to go out and do. And look, there is a strain in ultra-Orthodox Judaism that sees non-Jews as less than human, for sure. But most of those ultra-Orthodox Jews don't even participate in the Israeli military and will fight and die to prevent their sons from going to fight in the military because they'll be taken away from the Torah. So they don't actually threaten Gentiles unless maybe one of them is your landlord in Brooklyn. And then you might not get some repairs. I mean, the Satmar landlords are notorious, and in Jersey City, but there's so many misinterpretations of Jews and Judaism I'm seeing now that I can understand why anti-Zionist Jews would feel offended by what they're seeing on Twitter and on social media and want to kind of hit back and correct the record, defend the dignity of their spiritual faith community as well as their own family. And a lot of those people, they just haven't been around Jews. They don't really know what it's like. In my own family, like in my nuclear family, there's never been any pressure on me to be a Zionist. And that's what many Jews experience. But also at the same time, I don't think many non-Zionist, secular or progressive-minded American Jews really want their children to grow up to be anti-Zionist, because you're going to be a pariah, and it comes with certain very dangerous obligations, things that I consider to be obligations.
What are those obligations?
Well, it depends on how you interpret anti-Zionism. But you have to, first of all, you have to struggle against Zionism in solidarity with others struggling against Zionism. You have to embark on a war against Zionism. In a political and maybe even a spiritual sense. Everyone brings their own set of skills to the battle. But you have one advantage that a Palestinian doesn't have, or someone else who is a victim of Zionism does not have, which is that you can actually go into the community. You can go into the state of Israel and gain access, and you can come out of it with knowledge and information, and you can even be a whistleblower in one of the many Jewish institutions that have been captured by Zionism and turned into instruments of Israel's Holocaust regime. And that's your obligation. And I can tell you right now, we have Jews inside those institutions at the gray zone who are going to supply us with information. And my book Goliath was the outcome of me using my Jewish privilege as provided to me by the quote unquote Jewish state of Israel to get in there and report on what the society was really like. And what I showed in that book was that they were primed for genocide, that this was coming. And it was a message, a warning to everyone. A Palestinian American couldn't have written that book because they couldn't have got in there in the same way. Couldn't have gotten in the room with fascist groups like Im Tirtzu. Couldn't have gotten those Long Island fanatical douchebags on camera to say what they said. So I was using my Jewish privilege as an anti-Zionist to struggle against Zionism with the skills I have as a journalist. But it's up to anti-Zionist Jews to use the advantage they have that others don't have. And that means turning on the communal leadership. It has to be done. There's this thing you say at Passover, the 4 questions, and there's like the 4 sons, and it's supposed to be like the 4 kinds of archetypes of Jews, and this is how you learn to be a good Jew. And there's like the simple son, and then there's the wicked son, and then there's the wise son, and it's like the simple son doesn't know how to ask. The wicked son says, what does this mean for me? In other words, he's like, my own sense of morality and what I think is right and wrong trumps the sense of morality of the community's sense of morality. And then the wise son says, what does this mean for all of us? Basically, we're all going to put aside our differences and just get up and say the Shema together. And then whoever the communal leader is, we're just going to trust them. And that's what you learn from the 4 questions. And I think anti-Zionist Jews need to embrace the role of the wicked son, because it's the wicked son that puts humanity first. It's the wicked son that allows themselves to see what is being done in Gaza and allow it to shape their agenda according to how it tears their heart to shreds when they see just children being slaughtered day after day. The wise son says, oh, this is disgusting, these images are horrible, but I have to compartmentalize it and find some way, somehow, of explaining it away as the fault of Hamas and fall into line. I don't want to be wicked. But what has the communal leadership of American Judaism done? They've turned our religion into they've basically destroyed it. They've basically destroyed our image. What Gentiles say in private is a lot of people are wondering, where's the condemnation of this? What's wrong with them? What is wrong with this group of people that exerts so much power over our society? And then you have the internet kind of edgy anti-Semites who are noticing. They just sit around and notice. And it's pretty easy for them to notice because there's no other message coming out of our communal leadership that this is fascism. That what's happening in Gaza is just pure, unadulterated, messianic fascism. No, they're supporting it. There's nothing that will stop. There's no amount of violence that will stop them from supporting it. So I think embracing the role of the wicked son is actually the moral thing to do. It's actually the righteous thing to do. It's actually embracing the prophetic voice, which is much, much older than Tel Aviv.
Well, thank you for opening up about that and sharing that perspective. It's enlightening for me, and I think it'll be for others as well. So returning to Iran, we saw a society that's been under sanctions basically for the last 50 years. When I was there, and this might be kind of silly, but whenever I go to a Middle Eastern country and I just see paved roads, I'm like, oh, this is not a bad civilization. But Iran went beyond that. I mean, it felt like Turkey. It was very well developed and clean. I had never seen a cleaner Middle Eastern city. And we were in the nicer parts of Tehran, no doubt. But, we took the metro and we saw some, poorer areas, and it, it was rough. But for the most part, the infrastructure was there. I mean, they have highways and bridges and a subway that takes you underground, a clean subway with air conditioning that can take you anywhere in the city. And from what I'm told, that same subway system exists in other cities all across Iran. And that's something that after many, many decades of failed projects in the United States, we still don't have. Ever since I was a kid, they've been talking about a train that will take you from Orlando to Tampa.
Who the hell needs a train from Orlando to Tampa? As soon as you get off, you have to get in a car and drive a long distance again.
Yeah, pretty much. But
It was
it would
Obama.
reduce traffic on I-4, which is horrendous. But 20 years of discussions, and there isn't a single train. Meanwhile, in Iran, under sanctions, they have a functioning system that's on time and it's clean and it's fast, and it is important because Tehran experiences a lot of traffic. But this is also a society that makes everything it has. I saw billboards, advertising all types of products that are being built in Iran. And I, was asking the translator and the drivers, are these dishwashers made in Iran? Or, are these products being made in Iran? Are these smartphones? I saw an advertisement for a smartphone that they build in Iran. Probably they get the components from China, but they assemble it in Iran. And so all of that was impressive to me because of the fact that they're under sanctions. Like, I felt like Iran is a self-sustainable society that likes to produce, not just consume, from the West. And I thought that was impressive. But the sanctions obviously still have an effect. So can you share with me what you noticed, what you perceived in Iran, and how you think the sanctions are affecting the lives of everyday people?
Well, the subway, I was told, was not always on time. And it's because they can't get enough cars online because it's hard to repair them because of sanctions. I saw this also in Venezuela. In Caracas, they have a tram that goes into the mountains that made it possible for people in a hillside slum to be able to get down to the city in like 15 minutes instead of walking hours, like 2 hours down and back. Older people were able to get into the center of the city, and it stops at one point because a German or Swiss company that was providing them with the cables now has to abide by sanctions, so they can't run their systems at all. And the same thing's happening in Iran with airlines. Civilian airline parts were explicitly sanctioned. I published a piece at the Gray Zone that was sort of like a book review of this book called The Art of Sanctions by Richard Netenyahou, who designed under Obama and Biden the sanctions against Iran. And he probably had some role in Venezuela. And then he came back in the Biden administration to design sanctions against Russia over Ukraine. And in the book, he brags about, the book's cover is a pair of gloves with a noose. So it's sort of like strangulation. He brags about reducing the amount of chicken that Iranians had available for Nowruz. And he complains that he was not able to prevent Russians from obtaining, mayonnaise or fancy dressing or certain cheeses that are in their markets, and that he wanted to not only deprive the population of the things they loved and needed, including parts for used cars in Iran, in order to make it harder for Iranians to get to work, but he also wanted to flood these countries, specifically Iran, with telecommunications gear. Leading up to the Masa Amini color revolution, Richard Netenyahou oversaw a policy of flooding Iran with cell phones so they could all get on Signal and other encrypted apps to organize riots. And he claimed success for that. He was rewarded with a job at Columbia School of International Policy, SIPA, where he worked alongside Hillary Clinton and Victoria Nuland and other architects of coups and regime change wars. Student at SIPA, by the way, was one student was Mahmoud Khalil. None of these figures who are anti-Trump figures are speaking up for him, who's been kidnapped and disappeared into a federal prison for opposing their policies. But that's what sanctions has been about explicitly for the United States. Explicitly, it's about financially terrorizing the average person there. And we saw in the streets, how people they weren't desperate. Like Rudy Giuliani, who was a paid agent of the MEK, this anti-Iranian exile group, he gave a speech at an MEK fundraiser where he said, people in Iran are running around trying to sell their organs in the street. This is great. Sanctions, maximum pressure is working. We didn't see anything like that. Desperation, people trying to sell their organs. The desperation I saw, like real desperation, which is nothing compared to what you would see in like downtown Washington, D.C., is people addicted to heroin. Iran has high levels of heroin addiction. But what you would see, though...
Can you explain just briefly why they have high levels of heroin addiction?
Well, one thing, it's very accessible because of opium coming in from Afghanistan.
Who they share a border with, for those ignorant of the geography.
Yeah. Also, I should mention, Iran has some of the most progressive drug treatment policies and drug counseling policies and free methadone clinics everywhere. It's not something that they're hiding. They're taking on this problem in ways that even Western societies don't. But that's
a separate conversation.
That's sort of a non sequitur. The desperation is from the middle class, because Iran has such a highly educated population with a high rate of college graduation, advanced degrees, so much talent. All our colleagues that we met there were so talented, and hardworking. It made me want to hire half of them for the gray zone. They complain about inflation. They can't buy a new car. They deserve a new car for the amount of hours they work, and they have to work more and more hours. And then they can't be with their kids because they have to work 14-hour days. Their money is worthless against the dollar, and it fluctuates constantly. And then we would see it fluctuate as Trump would make bombastic statements about negotiations. And in the beginning, when the negotiations seemed to be going well, the Iranian rial would go up in value against the dollar. And then it went down one day when we were checking into a hotel in Isfahan, and our friend told us, your hotel would have been cheaper if there weren't these negotiations going on. So they're sort of prisoners to this regime of financial terror, and this war is going to do deep, deep, lasting damage to their economy.
So obviously now they're at war, given that they have to not only spend so much on firing these rockets and defending their airspace, increasing their intelligence operations in order to root out Mossad operatives, who, as we know, have been manufacturing and launching drones inside of the country. A lot of people think that the explosions we're seeing and the damage we're seeing is coming from F-35s just flying over Tehran. That's not necessarily the case. A lot of it is coming from drones and guided missiles that are being fired within a range of 5 kilometers inside of the country. And Israel is also, attacking very important energy infrastructure, which Iran depends on, like their oil and gas. And so, and Trump, when he came into office, he had the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. He said, we're going to eliminate 9/10 of their energy exports. I don't know how successful that was, but they're basically, when you're trying to get around sanctions, you just create shell companies. You sell to someone who sells to someone who eventually sells it to the market. They're going through that chain, and they're sanctioning those people in order to just constrict. And so the walls are sort of closing in. So the sanctions have always been damaging, but they're trying to increase those sanctions and tighten the noose harder while making them spend more. And so they're increasing their expenses and reducing their income. I'm very worried for Iran. I don't know how they'll get through this. It will only come, I think, through sheer willpower and sacrifice. What do you make of the current situation?
Well, from an economic point of view, I think that the reformist project in Iran has suffered a heavy blow here, which was based on restoring ties with the West. I mean, in some ways it was, it might have been more natural for them, and there's a large portion of the Iranian population living in the West and being shaped by that experience. And the West still has financial hegemony through the dominance of the dollar and the SWIFT system. It hasn't been replaced yet by BRICS. But where's the willpower in BRICS to actually step in now Russia is obviously preoccupied with its own war, effectively with the United States through Ukraine. Then there's China. China is the linchpin of BRICS, basically a peer competitor of the United States economically. What are they doing? What are they going to do to support Iran as Iran is going to be forced to pivot east? As Russia was always looking for a reset, a new start with the West, and the Ukrainian proxy war sort of forced them to wake up to reality and join together with this historic antagonist in China. So China has a real opportunity here. And I was just looking at, just scrolling on Twitter right before this interview, and I saw a Chinese ambassador tout his meeting with Nir Barkat, an Israeli minister, and China's ties with Israel. Like now, in the middle of this, they're still doing that. It's disgusting. It's shameful. And it shows that they are somewhat intimidated. And I think the Chinese leadership needs to understand that they're next on the chopping block after Iran. After Iran, they're definitely coming for China in a military fashion. And you can see the insanity of U.S. proxies in Ukraine. And I don't know if we can call Israel a proxy or the U.S. a proxy of Israel, but Netanyahu certainly is setting the agenda here. And Taiwan is also ruled by a very fanatical leadership in the DPP.
And there's been a big investment in the Uyghur narrative as well.
Well, the Uyghur situation in Syria is a dire threat to China because they're now being integrated into the formal military and defense ministry of Syria under U.S. orders. I mean, why would the U.S. want all of these foreign jihadists to be allowed to become citizens and be part of the defense ministry? What do they call them? Like the Muhajirin? And they're like the ones who were slaughtering Alawites for days and days and days. This spring, the Uyghurs this is the East Turkestan Islamic Movement or Islamic Party, which had been in Idlib. Following the collapse of the Assad government and the rise of Jolani, they openly came out and said, we are going to use Syria as a base from which to train and ultimately attack China. And what did China do? I don't know what they're doing. I mean, obviously they have their own strategy and they have their own intelligence assessment, but they didn't do much to support Assad. I mean, I'm not talking about, from my own, I'm trying to be objective here or see it from China's perspective. And China has touted its counter-terror model in Xinjiang as superior to what the West did. They'll point to what the U.S. did in Raqqa and Mosul, where they destroyed half of the city, killed tens of thousands of civilians to root out ISIS, versus their so-called vocational centers, where they were modernizing Uyghurs and de-indoctrinating them from Wahhabi Islamism. They tout that as superior because it's nonviolent, and they point to the improved status of Uyghur women in Xinjiang, and that they're working now. They're not having like 8 or 9 children. They're having 2 children, and they have more economic power. That's their model. But at a certain point, the contradiction is going to come out that they allowed this problem to fester, and it's going to come for them. But the Uyghurs are a mere proxy. I mean, Taiwan is the much more dire threat. China's surrounded on all sides by Western bases. The Philippines, Japan, Taiwan. Then you've got the Xinjiang threat, which is instrumentalized also by Erdogan's Turkey, a NATO member. They're surrounded. And look, Iran has been surrounded as well. So how can they look at this and allow this to happen, allow regime change to take place in Iran and not think that they will be next? I don't know. I was at this conference in Washington 2 weeks ago, the Special Competitive Studies Project of Eric Schmidt. which is an AI expo for AI warlords. Palantir was there along with all of these generative AI firms that are trying to predict conflicts for the military. You have drone manufacturers. And they brought in the Filipino defense minister for a very good reason, to be on center stage, I think with either a top Palantir executive or with Eric Schmidt himself. I mean, the whole conference was about preparing for war with China. And there was even a debate on center stage about whether the U.S. should focus its energy and resources long-term on preparing for the inevitable coming war with China. And Joseph Dunford, the former chairman of the Pentagon Joint Chiefs, said we have to actually prepare for war with Iran in the next 60 or 90 days. So there's just a debate.
Who do we kill first?
Who do we kill first?
Yeah.
And if the regime change project in Iran is interrupted and stopped in its tracks, they're going to have to put China further on the back burner.
Yeah.
They're going to have to put it in the icebox.
So I think it just appears as though China, their policy, which people jokingly say like do nothing and win, but what China seems like they're interested in doing is just doing business with everyone, and including Israel. But I saw that there were a few cargo planes coming from China that entered Iran in the last 2 days. These are massive cargo planes. I don't know if they're military cargo planes, but they're definitely capable of carrying, certain supplies. And they would turn off their transponders before entering Iran. So they flew, over Central Asia, over Turkmenistan, and then they would turn off the transponder, and it's assumed that, they're tracking the elevation and they saw that it's definitely going to Iran. So China is definitely supporting them behind the scenes in limited ways. It'd be nice if they gave them these flashy fighter jets that Pakistan is operating, which recently had a lot of success against India. That would definitely help Iran. I don't know if they could train their pilots fast enough, but that would definitely help them protect their airspace. But they also just completed this recent rail line, and Iran is sending as much oil and gas as they can to China, which is their weakness. And the U.S. understands this, which is why it's kind of funny that they pushed Russia closer to China. Now Russia's investing a lot of money with China in increasing their overland pipelines, because anything traveling through the ocean is in danger, as we saw with the Nord Stream pipeline. So China's aware. I mean, they're not ignorant of this. They just, maybe it's not the best strategy or tactics, but they're definitely aware of this. Maybe they feel that Iran has a stronger control of the situation than we do, and perhaps that gives them more confidence. But I agree that they should definitely see Iran as a speed bump towards them, and they can either let it get eliminated now,
and a threat to the Belt and Road Initiative, which the Silk Road was to run through Syria as well. Mm-hmm. And now you see the Syrian government cutting every deal possible with Western corporations. There's a corporate hitman from a Louisiana-based LNG company named Jonathan Bass, who's become the key fixer. He's a registered lobbyist for the Abraham Accords, key fixer for the Trump administration, who's just shopping Jolani to AT&T and Western oil companies as the man who will sell off Syria and prevent China from ever getting in there again. The same thing will happen in Iran if there is regime change.
Yeah, and this is happening at a very important time. Biden was so proud of this trade route he created between India and the UAE, and then it goes overland, and then it's supposed to exit from Haifa towards Europe, and that's supposed to counter the Belt and Road Initiative. And we've actually seen this trade route be used to help bypass the Houthi blockade, the Ansar Allah blockade in the Red Sea. And so Israel's been receiving goods overland, through this trade route that, basically goes through Jordan and then into Israel. And so, yeah, there's a lot at stake here. I hope China will do more for them.
And you have like the historic antagonism between Russia and Iran, which is clearly a factor.
Right.
I mean, the Soviet Union occupied Iran after World War II. The Iranian revolutionary government supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. And there was so much friction since then. There was friction between Russia and the IRGC and Hezbollah in Syria. Massive friction. And Russia was deconflicting with the Israeli Air Force, allowing them to attack Syria, essentially, and to attack the IRGC there. When I was there in 2018, there was enormous anger from the loyalist population toward Russia for allowing that. It's unclear where Russia is militarily, but China, as you said, China exerts influence primarily through economic cooperation, infrastructure. Russia has exerted a lot of influence in Africa and even in Latin America through military cooperation. So what are they doing here? There's this enmity that we saw even in the den of espionage in the U.S. Embassy, where there's kind of a wall of heroes or a room of heroes. The Americas are honored with, Malcolm X is on the wall. I believe Sitting Bull. There's Mao. Mao is a figure on the wall. Obviously, the Palestinian resistance heroes occupy a large space in that room. And then Russia is represented by a 17th century figure. There's no one from the Soviet Union. Also because of the official anti-communism of the Islamic Republic. But this is going to impact Russia as well enormously. And
yeah, the Russians apparently were supposed to give advanced fighter jets to Iran, and they've either been delaying it or they haven't done so for whatever reason. But there was hopes that Iran could modernize their fighter jets in time.
And Iran came to their, supported them in Ukraine, providing them with their drone technology, advanced drone technology.
The issue with BRICS kind of feels like the issue that I perceived with the axis of resistance, where you have these allies that are decentralized. And they're allies, but that is a very fragile alliance because it's not backed by any centralized, forced cooperation. And so you had Ansarullah, Iran, and Hezbollah support Hamas in very different ways. Obviously, Hezbollah did much more, and they paid a huge price. And Iran, as many have criticized them for, didn't step up to do more for them. It feels like recently, I think Brazil voted to keep Venezuela out of BRICS, and Turkey's trying to get in BRICS, and so you have these people just trying to benefit from the economic alliance and have BRICS benefit them more than they benefit BRICS.
Yep.
And there isn't this strong diplomatic. I mean, just look at China and India; they're like at each other's throats, but they make up the core of BRICS. How can that work? And so BRICS has a lot of potential, but a lot of flaws.
Yeah, a lot of contradictions. I mean, India might have to be replaced with Indonesia. Who did Brazil bring in instead of Venezuela? Argentina, like practically days before Milei was elected, and then he's the biggest bitch of Washington, so he leaves BRICS immediately. So yeah, I mean, you make a great point. BRICS has not brought the multipolar world into being yet, and this war in which Iran is essentially left on its own, as it almost always has been. All of its ballistic missiles were developed on their own. The only support they got was from Hafez al-Assad's Syria. Libya even denied them support. Is fighting. It's sort of like the image of this popular meme that went around about Gaza, which was based on the Tiananmen Square tank man who is stopping a tank, and you have tanks representing pretty much every powerful country in the world, and they're standing against it. I mean, that's Iran right now. Or the tanks are just sitting on the sidelines watching as if it won't affect them later.
Yeah. And that, I guess, to have another parallel or metaphor or whatever, how to describe it, Israel had so much success against the axis of resistance, primarily Hezbollah, more than Hamas. No one expected Hamas to really, I mean, just because of the nature of where they are in Gaza, completely besieged, trapped. I mean, there's only so much they could do. But the criticism of Iran is that they basically allowed Israel to one by one fight each part of the axis individually. And that's the last thing you should do if you're fighting as allies. Like Napoleon Bonaparte famously, when he would fight several enemies, he was able to wipe the floor with them because they allowed him to fight them individually. And they wouldn't unite, and so it just became easy for him to pick them off, and that's kind of what Israel's doing. Iran let them do that to their detriment, and now BRICS, potentially is allowing the same situation where they're just letting the West one by one destabilize and pick apart and weaken their opponents without providing a lot of support. But I mean, China has come to Russia's aid in as much of the way they can, so hopefully they'll increase that and improve that. But that's kind of the issue that I see.
Well, it's unfortunate you can't interview Yahya Sinwar because he's the one who put this whole dynamic into play. Within the context of being under siege and under endless occupation and having no way out diplomatically, absolutely no other choice. And militarily, had Sinwar gone to Iran, we see how deeply penetrated Iran is by the Mossad. We see how deeply penetrated Hezbollah was by Mossad and other arms of Israeli intelligence. Had he gone to them, there's no question Israel would have been able to detect and deter the Al-Aqsa flood attack on October 7th. Many elements, most of Hamas and its political leadership didn't even know this was coming. So it was the ultimate surprise attack. That was the only way to execute it. But he executed an attack against a genocidal society with the capacity to fight and carry out destructive acts against regional superpowers, which had the will to totally destroy Gaza. He launched an attack he could not finish, but there was a theory of change there. And I think it was a thoughtful theory of change, given the circumstances in which there was no diplomatic leverage at all. And it was hostage-taking. And in the past, hostage-taking had yielded real results. The only results that any governing entity of Palestinians had gotten in years and years and years. So over 200 hostages, it should have yielded more results, but that was contingent also on military pressure on Israel that was not guaranteed on October 7th, obviously, to Hamas. It wasn't guaranteed by Hezbollah, and Nasrallah launched this sort of low-intensity campaign limited to the north, which took some pressure off Hamas in Gaza. But what was Hamas going to do in a fight against the Israeli military? Yes, they would be able to kill hundreds of Israeli soldiers, but Israel can just keep throwing more fodder in and using its total aerial superiority. And then there's Iran, which was trying to develop its society and maybe get a new nuclear deal, pushing hard under maximum pressure to increase enrichment and break out capacity, make deals with China. They don't want to return to the trauma of the Iran-Iraq war, and so they're constantly holding off. And as I said before in this conversation, its military leadership bore the scars of the Iran-Iraq war. So they're not going to go all in. Nilforshan, the IRGC commander, was in the bunker with Nasrallah when Nasrallah was killed. Well, they were both killed. I visited Nilforshan's grave at the Isfahan Martyrs Cemetery. So they were planning this together, but Iran was simply providing Hezbollah with some modicum of support without enacting True Promise 3. After the assassination of Haniya, after all of these red lines were crossed, they didn't do it. And I think this is part of what got Nasrallah killed. Nasrallah was also playing a role in helping advise Iran on what to do, reportedly. So you are right, and I agree and thought this all along, that the only way this could have worked out for Hamas was that they all went in together before Israel destroyed Hezbollah's munitions stores, which you've pointed out are mostly like older ballistic missiles and rockets, but still could have been useful. And before Israel was able to launch this surprise decapitation strike inside Tehran. But that ship is sailed. But the point I'm making is, politically and from a military point of view, it also might have been impossible. And so it goes back to Sinwar's decision-making. He's put this dynamic into play. And so now here we are. The whole reason there's a war right now is because of October 7th. And Sinwar definitely knew this would take place at some point, that it would get to Iran. But Iran's leadership, I don't know how seriously they took it. Did they actually think there was going to be a deal and that they wouldn't be Gazified in Tehran? Those are questions that we, would need to put to them if we could ever get in the room with them. But all we have right now are questions and hindsight.
And speculation, yeah. I feel like we know Iran experienced those very destabilizing protests a couple of years ago. And just a couple months prior to October 7th, China brokered a deal between them and Saudi Arabia, which was like a 5-year truce, which I think became a 10-year truce. And it was just because Iran and Saudi Arabia were exhausted. Saudi Arabia was trying to spend all this money on, their stupid, like bringing WWE, wrestlers and paying them like $100 million to fight in front of like consumerist crowds in Riyadh. And MBS has this Project 2030 and the line. And so they're investing all this money. And the last thing they want to worry about is Ansarullah firing drones and blowing up oil refineries that he depends on. And Iran was like, we need to scale back a little bit. And so October 7th really did come at the worst time, like economically for Iran. So I feel like they kind of had the same position and posture that Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah did, where they wanted to show solidarity, but they were 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Hezbollah more than Iran. Iran, I feel like, wasn't 1 foot in at all. They were just trying to see, like, let the war come to them so that they could then potentially justify it to their people. Like, hey, look, now we have no other choice. But to get involved more militarily, perhaps they would have felt there's no way they could sell that to their people who were just protesting over not just Masa Amini, but it just became a way for everyone to express their grievances against the government. And the majority of the grievances really are the sanctions. There are a lot of people that are like, why are we spending money? Just like Americans, why are we spending money overseas? Why don't we spend it here? So, Iran was giving close to like $1 billion a year, apparently, to Hezbollah. And there's no admission of giving anything to Ansarullah. But of course, to some extent, they must be making some kind of investment in them. And so people are going to wonder, why aren't those resources coming here? Why are we going to pick a fight with this regional superpower in Israel when we could be spending it here? So maybe they just felt like there's no way they could justify going further. I don't know. Trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. But we're here now, and there's no going back. And so the hope is that they can survive this and weather this storm. Because the people I met in Iran, and I take a lot of heat for this because I have a lot of Syrian friends that I'm close to. I grew up with them. I love them and I respect them, but we bump heads all the time over my support for Iran or defense of Iran. And I do that because I do view Iran as the last bastion of resistance in the region. I don't like Iran because I like Persians more than Arabs or Kurds. I don't care about that. I'm not as religious as my friends, and maybe for good reason. Maybe it's good because I don't want to have these sectarian motivations and conflicts. I don't see Shias as heretics or deviants from the religion. Obviously, you have a minority of like lunatics who believe crazy stuff. But when I was in Iran, I didn't even feel like really, and I know I was in the capital, it's different. Maybe if I had gone to the more religious cities, I would see that. But I didn't feel like I was in a Shia country. I didn't, like people knew I was Sunni, there was no problem. The people I spoke to just came across as like very patriotic, dedicated, and very like religious Muslims. And I told my friends, my Sunni friends, I said, you guys would love Iran. And if you met the people I met, I know you wouldn't, like you could have no animosity towards them. Like we just need to see each other and understand that in the region we really do need unity, and we can't allow like those who spread not just like Wahhabi doctrines, but those who are like trying to politicize religious differences, and they have these lunatics just spreading this anti-Shia or anti-Sunni messaging to divide us, because the only way Israel is going to be defeated is if not defeated, at least stopped, is if there's unity in the region. And that requires, I think, humanization of one another. And I don't know, I'm kind of going on a rant now, but yeah, I take a lot of heat for that. And so I don't want to see these people that I met in Iran suffer. I don't want to see them go through what Iraq went through. I don't want to see them go through what Syria went through.
Why is it going through all of it? Why did Syria go through that? Why? Because they were on the clean break Zionist target list, and sectarianism has been inserted into religious spaces, particularly in Sunni Arab countries near Israel, in order to divide and increase pressure on Iran. I mean, the Israeli strategy is to create like a Sunni sellout belt, an axis of assistance surrounding Iran that will eventually balkanize Iran, starting with like Khuzestan, which is where Saddam invaded and has a partly an Arabic-speaking population, but also tons of oil fields and mineral richness. So we have to see the sectarianism as a product of Zionist sectarianism in many ways. And the U.S. and the collective West plays on it. I wrote a whole book called The Management of Savagery about how the collective West weaponized Wahhabi Islam in order to weaken resistance to its hegemonic control of the region. So, I mean, you're having tension with people because they just don't have the same level of political education. They've been duped, and also they hate Assad and maybe they lived there and he was an Alawite and people suffered. I get it. But are you really going to let the real terrorists win? And they are. They're focused entirely on localized sectarian concerns, and they're not seeing the big picture. They're not seeing the big picture at all. And I mean, there's so much silence now around Syria. It's because I won the argument, not I. I mean, there are other people who argued more stringently and more consistently than me. But those people who argued that regime change was an Israeli project with Gulf sectarian Sunni assistance to establish a kind of ostensibly Sunni supremacist project that was going to sell off Syria's resources and sovereignty to the West and allow Israel to occupy large parts of the country and dissolve the Syrian state has been proven correct.
And neuter it militarily.
And neuter it so that FSA mercenaries are alerted that the U.S. will refuel an Israeli aircraft at Al Tanf, and they are to stand down, and they obeyed those orders. So it's lost. And those people who celebrated liberation and the revolution can't be reached. I mean, I don't have any interest in talking to them, but it's like what you're dealing with is probably what I've dealt with fellow Jews on some level. Although you argued both sides in public.
I have, yeah, and I've made clear, I condemn Bashar al-Assad, and honestly, I'm still kind of confused about where I am on the position because I see it from both perspectives. But I call it out all the time, what Ahmad al-Shara or Jolani, whatever you want to call him. People are going to attack me for using both names. I don't care. But I call out, what this new government is doing, arresting Palestinian resistance, allowing Zionists into the country. Jonathan Bass, you and I have had discussions about him. I've posted about him.
They allowed the Mossad to come in and take Eli Cohen's files and belongings.
Yeah.
The top Mossad spy.
Yeah, and they write it off as, I wish they would just tell me straight up, and they don't. They just deny that any of this is happening. But I wish they would just tell me, look, this is a temporary relationship in order to strengthen our position now, but ultimately, we are opposed to Israel. If you look at the fighters in HTS, they have posted videos where they say Jerusalem is next. These people believe that, and they may have even gone to Syria to fight, believing that was next. So I know the people believe that for sure. Now, that fighter was arrested for putting that video out, but the Syrian people themselves, no doubt, hate Israel. The problem is the decision makers, this new political elite, I suppose, have become uncomfortably close, dangerously close, and it's resulting in, like you just said, providing their airspace to allow Israel to attack Iran. And I know that Syrians are viciously opposed to Iran because they blame Iran for what Bashar al-Assad was able to do to them. And it was interesting hearing, like, there's just a complete disconnect from both perspectives. Hearing, Professor Merendi, when he was talking to us in the cemetery, he told us that when Iran was under attack by Iraq, which was backed by 82 countries, there was only one country that stood with us. That was Syria. That was Assad's government. And they paid a price for it because they had a pipeline with Iraq and they had to basically sever that relationship. And so they financially suffered to show solidarity with us when the entire world was attacking us. Because we had a revolution. The Syrians have a revolution, and there's just this disconnect, but there's actually a lot of commonality and there's just a disconnect. People are ignorant of this history. They don't understand those perspectives. And if you don't understand it, you can't communicate and have dialogue and produce greater understanding and potentially, reduce tensions and align. What I'm just trying to communicate, because Syria can't be undone now, what I'm trying to communicate to people now is, as a region, we have to get past these differences and understand that, and I'm living here in the West, so I still consider myself, I guess, spiritually as part of the region, but what the region needs is an alignment of interests and understanding that collective security, instead of trying to undermine one another, collective security and collaboration economically, politically, militarily is needed in order to defend each other from the real threat and the real terrorists in the region, which is Israel. Unfortunately, I mean
that's the pragmatic stance. And again, I mean, I'm not a Muslim. I'm not like in it. I don't have skin in the game like you do. I don't have like family members who are connected to communal Muslim institutions, but I've been hosted by them. I felt the backlash when I exposed the white helmets, or helped expose the white helmets as a U.S. imperial front from many of the people who had hosted me. And I'm not going to shy away. I'm not an ally. That's a fake thing. Like, I'm either like a co-belligerent because I have my own beliefs, but I'm never going to sacrifice my own principles or my own beliefs because of a concept of allyship. And what became clear to me in that process of calling out the Syria regime change war is that there is a Muslim Zionism in the West for Muslims who've immigrated to the West from Syria particularly, also Iraq, some of them.
It's a very small minority, but they exist.
And now I don't mean they're Zionists in that they support Israel. No, they hate Israel, probably. It's that they supported those cancerous forces, Turkish, mercenary Al-Qaeda and ISIS-aligned forces that infested East Aleppo with all their hearts, who were terrorizing the entire population of that city, carrying out vehicle-borne suicide bombings against poor conscripted Syrian soldiers, destroying the old city, just a cancer on that city. They supported them. They supported Syria transforming into what it is now, where it's essentially ruled by a Sunni supremacist force that has destroyed the mosaic of Syria and imperiled all of these minority communities which have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And at the same time, they waged this campaign against Islamophobia inside the United States and Europe, and try to work with allies like me, and CARE will host me at their conventions to speak out against Islamophobia. And so they want a pluralistic mosaic society in the West that welcomes them and allows them to politically organize and elect people. And at the same time, they want a kind of Islamic Zionism, in other words, not an ethno-supremacist, but a religious supremacist or sectarian supremacist state that forms the pillar of their identity. And you can look at, why I called the gray zone was because ISIS published this paper called The Extinction of the Gray Zone through their glossy newsletter, calling for their forces to wage attacks inside the West in order to create Islamophobia, in order to force Muslims to make hijrah back to the Islamic Caliphate, which is exactly what Zionism does, or the Israeli state does across the West, is it seeks to imperil Jewish life and create the effect of anti-Semitism in order to force us to make quote-unquote aliyah. So it's the same thing. Look at the forces taking over Israel. They're very much like the forces that have taken over Syria. And that's the region that the U.S. and the collective West wants, because Israel's safe in that situation and the resources will be easily plundered. And so those Muslims in the West, the care types, they need to be held accountable and called out for what they have done. At the same time, I can't, argue with them when they say that, they faced harsh repression under Assad.
And it's
but
true
there's no excuse. There's no excuse for what they did, and this goes back to a historical point that I think is true in Iran. Syria was reformable around the time of the Iraq War, and Syria was going through a process of reform. And what young Syrians wanted when they protested during the so-called Arab Spring, which was turned by countries like Qatar into an Arab winter, and Turkey, what they wanted was reform. They wanted economic reform. They didn't want the economy to be concentrated into the hands of a little Rami Makhlouf mafia. They wanted more freedom to speak out. And it was going there, and then it became militarized.
Yeah.
And it became internationalized, where it got to the point where, some of those young Syrians who protested told me a Chechen guy checked my ID on my corner of my block, and I just left the country. That was enough for me. I became good friends with the guy who financed the protests, who is a Syrian American businessman in Damascus. And he ran a Pepsi bottling plant. And he said one day he went down to his plant, and the Al-Qaeda aligned forces had taken all his workers outside and forced them all to say the Shahada to see if any of them couldn't say it properly, and then they were going to execute them. And he said that's when he just gave up on the whole project. So
there was a lot of extremism.
So
and
my point is,
this massive proxy conflict.
Reform was possible. The enemy of reform was the United States and Israel. They didn't want that to happen, because reform still would have kept in power a kind of government or regime that was still willing to align with Iran, but had more liberalism inside and kept its population happy. GDP of Syria was expanding. They were talking about establishing a new wing of the Louvre in Damascus. Every Western student who wanted to learn Arabic would go to Damascus. And even what I saw in Damascus was just an incredible, modern, diverse city that functioned in many ways better than Beirut under sanctions and war when I went in 2018. That's also true for Iran. Reform would have happened in Iran on its own, and we saw it, where the state had basically stopped enforcing the hijab on many, in a sort of soft way. And that was symbolic of everything that was happening. But this war I think this war could reverse all of that. And by design. And I have nothing further to say in this interview.
Yeah, I was just going to wrap it up. But
so go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for your time and in educating me on so much. And I look forward to sharing it with my audience, and hopefully they'll benefit from it as well. So,
or be outraged.
On certain narratives, people will be outraged for sure, but I'm past that. I don't care. I'm an open-minded person, and the only way to learn is to have these discussions. So, wishing the best for Iran. I hope they can avoid further destruction, and I hope we're not visited by the FBI or anything like that for taking our trip. We had no problem coming back to the United States. But as things heat up, potentially, they could take interest in people like us for going there and viewing us as propagandists. I released a video. I don't know if you saw it when I came back, my trip to Iran. And I deliberately focused on the good that I saw, obviously, because I wanted people to understand, the good side of Iran. And I felt like that was my contribution to try and avoid war, ultimately, like showing the American people and my fellow Sunni friends, like, hey, Iran is not exactly what you think it is. You know, it's different. It's better than what you think it is. But yeah, I mean, people have attacked me and they said like you're an Irani-funded propagandist, which is not true. It's not true. But yeah.
Yeah, I know that's not true about you. And we got attacked accused in the Washington Post of that without any evidence.
Yeah.
And it's not true for us either. But don't give the FBI any ideas. I mean, I think this country is going into a very dark place right now. Military's in the streets in LA. What ICE is doing is not. It's immediately focused on immigration, but that's not really what it's about. It's about the establishment of a secret police and the deputizing of ideological supporters of this quasi-regime that we have here. And point of clarification, I said, we established the gray zone. The gray zone's name was inspired by a paper ISIS published called The Extinction of the Gray Zone. It's because we're defending the gray zone. And I think, this discussion is happening between us where we don't see eye to eye on everything. Is happening in the gray zone. So we're going to continue defending the gray zone. I don't care under increasing pressure. And we have a mission at the gray zone that I think every journalist should have, but very few do, which is to tell people in this country what they're not supposed to know, and to show them the evidence.
Yeah, and you guys are doing an excellent job, and it's an honor and a privilege for me to witness your work and collaborate with you in any way that I can. So I really appreciate that.
Thanks. We've done some pretty important work together, so we'll continue doing that.
Yeah. All right, Max, thank you so much.
Thank you.